Welcome to another deep dive. Okay, so we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
You shared this piece, Russia.txt, and wow, it really gets into it, with the whole Russia-Ukraine situation.
It's a lot to unpack.
That's for sure. But it's important, right? We've got to talk about this stuff, especially the nuclear dimension. It's like front page news every day.
Right, and this piece connects it all the way back to, 1945.
Yeah.
The U.S. use of atomic bombs, Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
It's impossible to ignore those historical parallels, isn't it? It makes you wonder, is this where we're headed again?
What Russia.txt does really well is it doesn't just lay out the events, but it digs into the why, the motivations. What were they thinking back then, and how does that relate to what we're seeing today?
Yeah, like, is Russia looking for that same kind of decisive victory? Using the threat of nuclear war to dictate the terms of surrender? Just like what?
It's a chilling thought.
Absolutely. And what really struck me was the part about the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We often focus on the immediate impact, but the long-term consequences, the radiation, the U.S. military presence, it's all there,
It's a stark reminder of what's at stake,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what makes this current situation so terrifying.
Speaking of terrifying, we have to talk about Putin and his red lines.
Right, because the piece lays out how those warnings have escalated. It started with non-lethal aid to Ukraine, but now we're talking advanced weaponry.
And each step of the way, there's this question. Is Putin drawing a line in the sand? Or is it all bluster?
It's a tough call. There's a whole debate within the intelligence community about whether these red lines are like firm boundaries or more fluid,
Yeah.
a way to exert pressure without committing to a specific course of action.
It's high-stakes poker, and we're all just trying to figure out his tell.
Exactly.
But then you add in what's happening inside Ukraine itself. They're pushing for these long-range missiles, the kind that could strike within Russia.
And that's where things get really dicey, because the piece highlights how reliant Ukraine is on Western intelligence and targeting technology, right? So even if it's a Ukrainian finger on the trigger, Russia might see it as a direct attack by the West.
A blurring of those lines they keep warning about.
Exactly.
And to make matters worse, they go and update their nuclear doctrine. Talk about bad timing.
It definitely threw a wrench in things.
Mm-hmm.
And what's scary is the ambiguity. The source points this out. Russia expanded the circumstances under which they might use nuclear weapons, but the language is so open to interpretation.
So instead of clear lines, we have this, gray area.
Right, and when you're talking about something as potentially devastating as nuclear war, gray areas are terrifying.
It's like trying to predict an earthquake. You know the fault lines are there, but when and where that pressure will be released.
And in this case, the potential consequences are almost impossible to grasp.
It's heavy stuff.
It really is. And understanding the historical context, like Russia.txt encourages us to do, it just makes it all the more real,
And scarier, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like we're standing on a powder keg, and everyone around us has got a lighter.
Yeah. It's a pretty apt analogy.
And this whole idea of a new Cold War, which Russia.txt really digs into, it's just unsettling, to say the least.
It's a sobering thought, for sure. We've moved past that, haven't we? Or at least we thought we did. But this conflict, it has the potential to draw in all the global players, reawaken those old ideological divides.
And with that comes the very real risk of, miscalculation. One wrong move, one misunderstanding.
It could spiral out of control incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And that's where this dead hand thing comes in.
Okay, yeah. The dead hand, chills, literal chills when I read that part. It sounds like something out of a dystopian movie or something.
You're not wrong to be freaked out. It's essentially a system that can automatically launch a nuclear counterattack, even if, Russia's entire command structure has been wiped out.
So wait, even if they're hit with a first strike, this thing could still, retaliate.
Exactly. Guaranteed destruction on both sides. It's been a cornerstone of nuclear deterrence since, forever, basically.
But it just feeds into this whole terrifying logic, doesn't it?
And that's what Russia.txt does so well. It doesn't shy away from that. These systems, they're supposed to prevent all-out war, but they also create this crazy high-stakes environment where one mistake could literally mean the end of everything.
So much to process. We've gone from historical parallels to Putin's red lines to this new Cold War and now a doomsday system. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around. But the piece doesn't just focus on states, like these big faceless entities. It also highlights the role of individuals.
Right, like the people within those systems.
Exactly, because ultimately, even with all the talk of doctrines and weapons and, dead hands, it all comes down to human beings making decisions.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the geopolitical maneuvering and all that, but like you said, at the end of the day, it's people making these calls.
Leaders, diplomats, military personnel, they're the ones making decisions that could literally decide the fate of the world.
It's kind of wild when you think about it like that. It's like Russia.txt is saying, yeah, pay attention to the presidents and the prime ministers, but also pay attention to the people, behind the scenes, the ones making the calls, big and small.
Yeah, and those choices, they matter. The source even brings up these wild card scenarios. Whistleblowers, rogue commanders, people who might like break rank.
And we can't forget about hackers either, right? I mean, we're talking about a world where cyber warfare is a very real threat. Imagine if someone spoofed a missile launch detection system or something.
It doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show that as much as we try to understand the big picture stuff, the motivations of states and all that, there's always this element of unpredictability when it comes to individuals.
So where does that leave us? We've covered a lot of ground, to say the least. Historical parallels, the situation in Ukraine right now, this whole new Cold War idea, the dead hand. It's a lot.
It's heavy stuff, no doubt. But I think the takeaway here, and Russia.txt really drives this home, is that knowledge is power. The more we understand the historical context, the motivations of the players, the potential consequences, the better equipped we are to have, informed discussions and advocate for policies that prioritize peace.
It's like this whole deep dive has given us a new lens through which to view this conflict.
Exactly. One that goes beyond the headlines and the political rhetoric and all that noise.
So to everyone listening, I think this has to be a call to action. Dive deeper into this issue. Challenge your own assumptions. Talk to people who have different perspectives, because the stakes, they really couldn't be higher.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay